That ring? Where did you get that ring? Victoria Alvarez's voice cracked as the chandelier light splintered across a deep blue sapphire, the same sapphire she had pressed into her son's palm 20 years ago. The restaurant was all velvet and crystal, a place where people laughed softly and problems were solved with expensive wine. Victoria had come to breathe, to pretend she wasn't still waiting for a boy who never came home. But then she saw it. A man at a corner table lifting his glass, the sapphire flashing like a lighthouse in the dark. Her heart stopped, because she knew every curve of that band, every tiny imperfection, because she had chosen it for Adrian, her only son, on the last birthday they celebrated together. And there it was, unmistakable, even down to the small engraved letter A on the inside. Her legs carried her forward before her mind could catch up. The man, tall, unfamiliar, too calm, looked up as she approached. His name, she would learn later, was Matteo Serrano. At this moment, he was simply a stranger wearing a piece of her missing child. Victoria's hands trembled over the tablecloth. "That ring belonged to my son," she whispered, eyes burning. "Adrian disappeared 20 years ago. Tell me you didn't take it." Matteo's expression changed just slightly, as if a locked door inside him had finally heard the right key. He didn't pull his hand away. He didn't deny it. He only stared at the sapphire, then back at her, and said the words that made the room tilt. "I've been waiting for you." Matteo Serrano didn't flinch under Victoria Alvarez's stare. He slowly set his glass down, the sapphire, catching one last shard of light, as if it too were listening. For a heartbeat, the entire restaurant felt far away. Only the ring existed, only the space between a mother and a stranger. "I didn't steal it," he said, at last, voice low, steady, almost tired. He turned his hand so the band faced her, offering it like a confession. "And it isn't mine." Victoria's breath hitched. "Then why are you wearing it?" She demanded, the words sharper than she intended, because fear had been living in her chest for 20 years, and it had learned how to bite. Matteo swallowed, eyes dropping to the sapphire, as if it weighed more than gold. "Because it's the only thing I had left to prove he was real," he murmured. "The only thing that didn't disappear." He slid the ring off with care. Too much care for someone who didn't understand its meaning. When he placed it on the tablecloth, his fingers lingered a fraction too long, like letting go hurt. "I've kept it for 20 years, he continued, his voice tightening. "Not to keep it, but to return it. To the right person." Victoria's hands hovered over the ring, trembling. She could almost feel Adrian's warmth on the metal, the boy he was before the world swallowed him. "You knew him," she whispered, the anger collapsing into something raw. "You knew my son." Matteo met her eyes, and whatever he carried behind them looked like a storm that had never ended. "I did," he said. "And I've been waiting because one day I hoped you'd walk into a place like this and finally ask the question I've been rehearsing in my head for 2 decades. Matteo's gaze drifted past Victoria, as if the restaurant's candlelight had suddenly turned into something colder, rain river water night. "It was November," he began, voice tightening around the memory. 2003, the kind of storm that swallows streetlights and makes even brave people pray. He didn't look at the ring as he spoke. He looked at his own hands, as if they still remembered the weight of a stranger's life. "I was driving over the old bridge when I saw the skid marks, fresh, frantic. Then, the sound." His throat bobbed, metal screaming, a splash so violent it felt like the river was angry. Victoria's breath caught. I ran to the rail and saw him. Matteo continued, eyes glassy now. A young man in the water fighting it like it was a living thing. He'd been thrown from the car, barely conscious, disappearing between waves. I didn't think, He shook his head, a bitter half-smile. "I jumped." The story turned the air heavy. Victoria could almost hear the rain taste the cold. "I got to him just in time," Matteo whispered. He was shaking, lips, blue eyes, trying to stay open. And then he grabbed my wrist hard, like he knew he had seconds to leave something behind. Matteo's hand moved unconsciously toward the sapphire. He forced the ring into my palm and said, "Don't let them take it, please. Return it to my mother." Victoria's vision blurred. He said that. Matteo nodded once, slow and painful. He didn't give me his name. He didn't have to. His eyes lifted to hers, haunted. Because a mother's love doesn't forget a face, and neither does a promise made in a storm. Matteo's voice dropped even lower, as if saying the next part too clearly might summon it back. "After I pulled him out, the ambulance came fast," he said, but the river had already taken what mattered most: his wallet, his papers, anything that could have told the world who he was. He swallowed, eyes fixed on the sapphire, as though it were the only solid thing in that night. At the hospital, they couldn't find a name. No contacts, no identification. So they wrote one down for him. Victoria's fingers curled around the edge of the table. What name she breathed. Matteo's jaw tightened. They called him No Name John. A placeholder. A shrug in ink. His hands trembled once, then steadied. He slipped into a coma. Days turned into weeks. I kept coming back, asking questions, begging nurses to let me sit for 5 minutes, because I couldn't shake the feeling that someone somewhere was waiting for him. Victoria's eyes brimmed. And when he woke up, Matteo's expression broke just slightly. He opened his eyes, and it was like he'd come back without the map to himself, he whispered. Severe amnesia. He didn't know his name, didn't recognize faces, didn't remember the bridge, the storm. Nothing. Just fear. Confusion. He rubbed a hand over his mouth, fighting the ache in his throat. Without papers, without memory, he became a case file. And when the hospital needed the bed, the state took him, sent him to a long-term care center. Like a living person could be filed away and forgotten. Victoria's breath shuddered. My son. She whispered, the ring now burning in her palm. He didn't vanish. He was erased. Matteo's eyes softened, but the softness didn't make the story kinder. I tried to find you, he said, and the words sounded like an apology he'd been carrying for 20 years. I asked at the hospital. I begged for any lead, any record that could connect him to a family. But without a name, he was just a number in a system that moves on the moment you stop screaming. Victoria's lips parted, but no sound came out. I thought the ring would help, Matteo continued, voice rough. So I went to the police. I told them I'd pulled a young man from the river. I showed them the sapphire and the engraving. I thought they'd listen. His jaw clenched. Instead, they looked at me like I was the problem, like I was a thief trying to invent a tragedy. Victoria's hands tightened around the ring as if it might vanish again. They said if I didn't hand it over, they could arrest me for possessing stolen property, Matteo whispered. They warned me to stop asking questions, told me I was interfering with procedure. He let out a breath that trembled at the end, and suddenly I understood if I stayed, I might lose the only proof he'd ever existed, the only promise I could still keep. His gaze dropped to the sapphire shining quietly between them, like a heartbeat refusing to die. So I left, he said, the shame in his voice cutting deeper than any accusation. But I didn't let go of the ring. I carried it through years like a secret prayer, because if the world could erase your son with paperwork, then this was the one thing it couldn't erase. He looked up, eyes damp and steady. I kept it so that someday when you finally appeared, I could give you back more than a jewel. I could give you a trail home. Matteo's shoulders sagged, as if the next truth was the heaviest of all. I didn't just carry the ring, he said quietly. I carried him in every way the system wouldn't. He told Victoria how he tracked the facility where the no-name John had been sent, how the halls smelled of disinfectant and forgotten stories. He needed something human. Matteo murmured, eyes shining. A voice that didn't treat him like a file. So Matteo started visiting first with guilt, then with devotion, bringing small things, a paperback warm socks, a radio that played old songs. The young man's eyes stayed confused, unanchored, but he clung to Mateo's presence like it was the only shoreline left. At some point, Mateo admitted I stopped calling him John Doe. It felt cruel. He deserved a name that sounded like hope. His voice cracked. So I called him Gabriel. And slowly, he answered. That's where Lila, the nurse, entered the story. Gentle hands, patient smile. A woman who spoke to Gabriel as if he mattered. She didn't pity him, Mateo said. She saw him. In that bleak place, Lila became warmth. Gabriel became less afraid. And for the first time in years, Mateo watched something like love grow, where tragedy had tried to plant nothing. Then winter came again, another cruel echo of that storm. Gabriel caught a severe pneumonia. Machines replaced laughter. Breaths became shallow, counted like coins running out. And then Mateo whispered. He woke up just for a moment. Clear, like the fog lifted to let him say one last thing. Mateo's eyes locked onto Victoria's. He asked me to find you. And he said, "Tell my mother I forgive her. I never stopped loving her." The ring between them suddenly felt less like jewelry, more like a heartbeat returned. Mateo's fingers tightened around the edge of the table as if he needed something solid to keep him from falling into the past. "There's one more thing," he said, and the words came out like shattered glass. "Something I never told anyone, because I was afraid it would be taken from me the way everything else was taken from him." Victoria's chest rose and fell too fast. "What is it?" Mateo glanced toward the restaurant entrance where a little girl sat in the waiting area with a coloring book. Tiny hands smudged with crayons, curls bouncing when she laughed at her own drawing. She couldn't have been more than 3. She looked up once, caught Mateo's eyes, and waved like the world was still kind. "That's Sophia," Mateo whispered, and his voice softened into something that sounded like love and grief braided together. "She's not my daughter by blood." Victoria's breath stopped. "She's Gabriel's," Mateo said, each syllable deliberate, painful. "And Lila's." The room tilted. Victoria's grip tightened on the sapphire ring until it hurt, but Lila, she was pregnant before Gabriel got sick. Mateo interrupted gently, as if he'd rehearsed this sentence 1,000 nights and still bled every time. A quiet miracle in a place built for endings. Gabriel never fully understood it, but when he held Lila's hand, he looked less lost. Mateo's eyes glistened. After Gabriel died, Lila tried to keep going. She fought harder than anyone should have to, but the birth was complicated. She didn't make it. His voice broke, then steadied again, and suddenly there was this tiny life left behind, and a system ready to swallow her whole. Victoria stared at the child, trembling. I registered Sophia as mine." Mateo confessed shame and devotion colliding in his expression. Not to steal her, to protect her, to keep her from becoming another no name in another building with locked doors. He swallowed. "I didn't just carry a ring, Victoria. I carried a family your son never got to bring home." Victoria's first instinct was the only language her world had ever trusted control. Solutions. Lawyers on speed dial. A bedroom prepared in a mansion that never learned how to feel warm. "She'll come with me," Victoria said, eyes fixed on little Sophia, as if looking long enough could rewrite time. "I can give her everything: private school, security, a future. I'll hire the best attorney. We'll settle this properly." Her voice softened into something almost pleading. "Name your price, Mateo. Whatever you want." Mateo's expression didn't harden, but it closed like a door protecting what was sacred. "No," he said quietly. Victoria blinked, stunned. "No." He shook his head once, slow and certain. "I didn't jump into a river for money. I didn't sit beside Gabriel's bed for money. And I didn't sign my name on Sophia's birth papers for money." His gaze flicked toward the child, then returned to Victoria with a steadiness that made her feel suddenly small. Love isn't a transaction, Victoria. You can't buy back 20 years with a check. The words struck deeper than any accusation. Victoria's throat tightened. She's my granddaughter, she whispered, as if blood alone should unlock every door. And she's my daughter in every way that matters, Matteo replied, voice low but unshakable. If you want a place in her life, you don't start with ownership. You start with trust. He leaned forward, eyes shining with something fierce and protective. Sophia doesn't need a palace. She needs the one person who stayed when everyone else disappeared. Victoria's hands trembled around the sapphire ring. For the first time, wealth felt useless, too loud, too empty. She looked at Sophia again, at the innocent curve of her smile, and something inside Victoria broke open the realization that her son had been lost not only to a storm, but to a lifetime of believing money could solve what love should have held. I don't know how to do this, Victoria admitted, tears finally slipping free. Matteo's voice softened just a fraction. Then learn, he said, slowly, honestly, one day at a time. Victoria didn't arrive at the cemetery with a convoy or a bouquet big enough to impress strangers. She came quietly, just her the wind and the sapphire ring heavy in her coat pocket, like a confession. Matteo walked a step behind, with Sophia's small hand in his, the child humming softly, as if graves were simply another place the world asked her to be brave. The headstone was modest. No marble angels, no polished speeches carved into stone. Just a name, Gabriel, and 2 dates that looked too close together. Victoria froze, breath catching, as if her body still believed her son might stand up and apologize for being gone. He's here, she whispered, the words breaking in half. Matteo knelt and brushed away a few fallen leaves with the tenderness of someone who had visited often. Someone who had made sure Gabriel was never alone, not in life, not in death. I couldn't give him back his memories, Matteo said softly, but I could give him dignity. A place. A name that wouldn't be erased. Victoria sank to her knees, soil darkening the hem of her expensive coat. For the first time in years, money had no use, no shortcut, no negotiation, no miracle it could purchase. She pressed her palm to the earth, as if she could reach him through it. I looked for you, she choked out, though she wasn't sure if she was speaking to Gabriel or to the guilt inside herself. But I didn't look the right way. Sophia stepped closer, peering at the stone with wide, solemn eyes. Is he sleeping? She asked, voice tiny. Matteo swallowed hard. He's resting, he said, pulling her gently against his side. Victoria's gaze lifted to Matteo, then really lifted, as if seeing him for the first time. Not as an obstacle, not as a man who had her granddaughter, but as the one person who had stayed when the world filed her son away and turned the page. I can't pay you for this, Victoria whispered. Matteo shook his head. No, he replied, but you can honor it. And standing there between a grave and a child's warm hand, Victoria understood. Love wasn't proven by what you owned. It was proven by what you refused to abandon. A week after the cemetery, the mansion changed in ways Victoria couldn't buy. It wasn't the chandeliers or the silk curtains. It was the sound of Sophia's laughter bouncing down hallways that had only known echoes. Matteo moved in quietly, not as someone claiming space, but as someone carefully returning life to it. A small backpack by the stairs, children's drawings taped to the fridge, a bedtime story whispered where silence used to sit like dust. Victoria watched from doorways, learning the unfamiliar rhythm of real family, messy, tender, unpolished. Then one rainy evening, Matteo found it. He was unpacking an old emergency kit he'd kept since the storm items he'd never thrown away because grief makes relics out of ordinary things. At the bottom of a waterproof pouch behind a faded receipt lay an envelope sealed shut, the paper warped by years, but the handwriting still sharp. Matteo's hands began to shake. "What is that?" Victoria asked, stepping closer. Matteo swallowed, eyes fixed on the ink. I never saw this before." He turned the envelope over. On the front, written with careful urgency, were the words, "For my mother." Victoria's breath stopped. She opened it with trembling fingers, and the room narrowed to the sound of paper unfolding. Adrian's voice rose from the page, apologizing, pleading, promising. He wrote that he hadn't abandoned her. He had stormed out in anger, yes, but he was coming back. In 1 hour, he said. He was returning to make peace, to hold her, to undo the last harsh words. When the accident took the road, the bridge, the future. Victoria pressed the letter to her chest like it could stitch time closed. "He was coming home," she whispered, breaking on the truth. And for the first time in 20 years, the mansion didn't feel like a monument to loss. It felt like a door finally opening. The letter didn't erase the years, it simply gave them a different shape. After that night, Victoria stopped trying to fix the past and began doing the only thing left honoring it. She asked Matteo to show her the places she'd never known existed, the state office corridors, the care center, the riverbank, where a promise had been made in cold water. Each stop carved a new kind of grief into her, one that no longer looked for someone to blame, only someone to protect. And slowly the mansion became less of a shrine and more of a shelter. Sophia grew into its rooms like sunlight, learning where the windows are. She left toys in corners and fingerprints on glass. She called Victoria grandma without ceremony, just one day, as if it had always been true, and Victoria had to turn away so the child wouldn't see her crying. Matteo watched her change with cautious hope. He didn't hand her forgiveness like a gift. He let her earn it in the quiet ways that matter, showing up, listening, staying when it was uncomfortable. Together they built something that reached beyond their walls. Victoria funded it, yes, but for the first time, money was not a weapon or a shortcut. It was a vow. They named it the Gabriel Foundation, a place dedicated to helping people who'd been swallowed by amnesia bureaucracy and the streets people labeled no one waiting for someone to remember their real name. In her final years, Victoria lived more simply, more honestly, surrounded by laughter, not silence. And every time Sophia ran through the hallway, Victoria would touch the sapphire ring and whisper, not in regret this time, but in gratitude. Love found its way back. The day they buried Victoria Alvarez, the mansion didn't feel like a palace anymore. It felt like a home that had finally learned how to breathe. Matteo stood beside Sophia in the back row of mourners, his hand resting gently on her shoulder as she held a small, folded napkin, the way children hold things when they don't yet understand what they're losing. After the service, rain threatened the sky, so they did what Victoria would have called impossible a year ago. They went to the restaurant where it all began. Same velvet booths, same chandeliers. But the air was different, lighter, kinder. Sophia swung her legs beneath the table, humming to herself, while Matteo placed the sapphire ring on the white cloth like a final chapter coming to rest. She wanted this to end in love, he whispered, voice rough with grief. Years later, on Sophia's wedding morning, the ring returned, not as an heirloom of sorrow, but as a symbol remade. The sapphire had been reset into a delicate piece, fastened to her veil, catching the light each time she turned her head, as if Gabriel's story was finally allowed to shine without pain. Sophia smiled through tears and looked at Matteo the way daughters look at the man who chose them. "We made it," she whispered. And in that moment, the 20-year tragedy didn't feel like only loss. It felt like love refusing to disappear. Sometimes the world steals years from you through accidents, silence, pride, or the cruel machinery of procedure. But healing begins the moment you stop trying to buy your way out of grief and start showing up with humility, with patience, with real love that stays. The past can't be rewritten, but it can be redeemed when you turn pain into purpose and absence into protection for others. If this story touched you, comment below. What would you say to someone you lost if you had one more hour? And if you want more emotional cinematic stories like this, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next story that might heal a piece of you too.